Hey guys, welcome to Some Things Fishy. Today we're going to be diving into some fascinating and awesome opportunities for a beginner seahorse tank and how to set that up. A lot of people think that seahorses are an intermediate or advanced fish, and I'm going to be challenging that a little bit because they're fairly easy to set up a tank for if you do it right. So seahorses are really awesome. People are huge fans of them because of they're really unique, right? There's nothing really out there that look quite like them. They're really fun to watch and interact, and they even are fairly somewhat cool to breed, and they're very simple to breed. So um, to start out, we need to choose the right tank. So when you're picking a tank for seahorses, you need to choose something that's very vertical. A 30-gallon tank is ideal for a small group of seahorses, even down to just a pair. And you don't need you don't really need that swimming length because seahorses are very vertical, right? They move up and down. They don't move side to side very much. They don't need a lot of space to swim that way. You need to have that height for that purpose. And for a lot of the plants and coral that we're choosing, they grow up and down. They don't grow wide, right? They don't spread like a lot of the corals that are pretty standard in reef tanks. They grow vertically. So in terms of filtration, seahorses they're not very strong swimmers. So you need a very gentle filtration system. We're talking like very minimal so that their food doesn't move too quickly and they don't get whisked away in the current. So if you have a tank already in mind and it already has filtration built in, we need to worry about slowing that speed down so that the seahorses are happy. So something like a canister filter or a hang-on back filter for a larger tank would be just fine. We're going to be talking about all-in-ones a little bit later. So in terms of heating, obviously pretty standard ocean temperatures. So high 70s, anywhere between 78 and like 81 is just fine. I really recommend all-in-one aquariums for seahorses, simply because that height can really give you a lot of options in terms of filtration in the back. You really should have a skimmer. So a hang-on back skimmer would be really good for these guys. Having a tank that has a sump is really good for seahorses, but it can get really complex. If you're really keeping a small volume of seahorses and a lot of water up top and you have the macroalgae, you don't really need it, especially if you have like a hang-on back skimmer or something like that. So keeping it really minimal is really critical for those guys there. So all-in-one aquariums are really awesome option because they tend to have that gentle flow, and you can really choose where it is. There's a lot of entryways into the filter, so it's not just like one thing sucking, one thing blowing. You have a lot of options there. So in terms of lighting, you're going to be growing macroalgae in a seahorse tank. They really like those grassy areas in nature. When I've been scuba diving, they live in these, like, it almost looks like a grassland, and so you need a lot of white light. They're very close to the surface instead of blue. So I really recommend like the AI Prime 16 HD. They're really great and very simple, and they work really well. And they are great. So when you're doing your salt mix, standard salt mix, everything's normal. Except for feeding. Feeding is very critical with seahorses. They're predators. They eat, they eat normal fish food, right? So a lot of people feed that brine shrimp, which is just fine, but they're not very fast. They're not hunters. They're ambush predators. So they disguise themselves and they catch things as it swims on by. So when you're feeding these things, you can't just like feed the whole tank like we do with our normal reef tanks. You kind of need to specifically spot feed. I recommend a syringe or something like that filled with that frozen food that they really like, and you just kind of just slowly pump it out in front of their faces and they can individually grab. So they're a little bit more of a daily upkeep type of fish versus something that you can kind of ignore. They really need to be fed, target fed, and things like that. In terms of a tank setup, you can't just do a standard rock and sand setup and do fish only. You really need to have something that they can grab onto. A lot of people use like fake plastic or something that they can grab onto because it's just easy. What I recommend is getting some macroalgae that grows out really large, not necessarily Chaeto. In fact, I'd avoid Chaeto, but something that's more leafy, like those dragon's breath type, leafy algae, things that are really tall that they can grab onto with their legs so that they can have somewhere to live. Remember, these guys are not big swimmers. They just they grab onto one thing, maybe they'll swim to another one. It's really slow and they hang out. I recommend really keeping it simple in terms of tank mates. You don't want anything that's too fast. Otherwise, they'll just eat all of the seahorse food and kind of bully them. You don't want that. Anything that's going to bully these, anything that has a chance of bullying, you got to keep out of there. Pipe fish are a great option. They're kind of very similar, and keep it simple. When you're getting ready to do seahorses, I really recommend doing a really strong cycle. So a lot of people say that you can do a fish in cycle, which you can, but with seahorses, you have to feed very heavily, and you run the risk of not have cycled enough to handle that ammonia load. So I really recommend doing a very long cycle. Make sure your everything's set up properly. You can even add cleanup crew before you add the fish. So hermits, snails, things like that, because when you start feeding as much as seahorses generally need, right, you need to see them actually feed. So that means you're going to be feeding a lot more. There's going to be a lot of algae growth, things like that. So you have to have something that's going to be able to handle that. So again, very simple tank, things that grow vertically. So you can do soft coral, you can do algae. I recommend algae just because it's easier. Coral has a lot more requirements. Algae will grow as long as you have a light. And if you have the really good macroalgae, it'll actually just, it won't let other algae grow. So begin with your tank, your 30-gallon tank, add some sand, add some rock, and then you need to start growing that algae first, right? The seahorses really need something to grab onto before you can just chuck them in. So patience, precision, all those things are really critical with seahorses. And again, it sounds very scary, but they're really easy fish, right? They don't fight. You don't have that aggression issue. They're just going to hang out and they're going to take things really slow, and that's okay. And so a lot of people actually recommend going with some fake plants and plastics and things like that, because it's just easier and it gives something for them to start with. And so that's a really great option when you're starting up a beginner seahorse tank. So creating a seahorse tank might seem daunting at first, but you can follow these really simple guidelines, right? 30-gallon tank, tall plants and corals, a decent light, really low flow, and they can be really healthy and vibrant in your aquarium. So just understand their specific needs. They're slow, and they need something to grab onto, and they need low flow. That's really pretty much it. So please shout out in the comments if you are looking into getting into seahorses. We love talking about them. They're kind of a rare thing in the hobby. They're not really in normal fish stores. You kind of have to order them online. But I really hope that your fish keeping journey works out and that you have a lot of success.